The final section of the teacher work sample is the reflection and self-evaluation. This part of the teacher work sample is intended for you to wrap up the whole process, draw some final conclusions, talk about what you're going to do, your future goals for yourself, and that is professionally and not just as a teacher, but also as a growing teacher, as a reflective practitioner. And the idea here is that as you are going through this whole process, you have made observations. You've seen your students learning. You've seen some of them not learning as well as they should. And the point is that you need to recognize that, be able to explain why that happened, and really this is a time for you to express your accountability on your own terms. As a teacher, your job is to teach, the student's job is to learn, and your job is to make sure that it happened. So, the reflection and self-evaluation presentation is going to be a pretty short one also, not quite as short as number 5, but these are the things we're concerned with. The rubric gives all the information that you will need. Again, you'll notice that for the indicators not met and partially met, you can barely even read those. That's by design. They don't matter because you're going to meet them. So, starting with the first indicator, interpretation of student learning. The teacher uses evidence to support conclusions drawn in the analysis of student learning section. If you remember when we were talking about the analysis of student learning, the idea in that section was just the facts. Just present the data. Don't interpret them. Don't say a great deal about them. Just say what you see. This is the place where you're going to say what you found. You're going to talk about what the data mean. So you'll be interpreting. That is the difference between measuring and evaluating and assessing. The assessment, this process is where you're actually going to look at how you could explain the learning and the lack of learning in some students, which is inevitable, according to the information that you have about those kids, combined with the information that you have as you look back on how you taught. Because there are some things that the students will not have learned. It probably will be due to, at least in part, a mismatch between the instructional strategies or the content approach that you took and who the students are, what their needs were, according to the contextual factors section. It may also be that you just really did not cover, and you may have noticed this in the 5th section, that you just did not cover the content as well as you thought you should have, or as well as you thought you would have. In any event, part of your reflection is supposed to include this information. The second indicator is insights on effective instruction and assessment, and again, look at the indicator MET column in yellow. It identifies, or the teacher identifies, successful and unsuccessful activities and assessments. So again, here we are being a bit more specific about why the students did or did not learn and how your teaching influenced that. And you're also looking at plausible reasons. For instance, if you did something, if you had an activity that was predominantly abstract in nature, but your students are actually concrete operational, then according to Piaget's theory of cognitive development, we would say that your practice was developmentally inappropriate because you were teaching on a formal operational level and the students are on a concrete operational level. So you can look back at your educational psychology book, your child development book, or any of the other information that you have that relates to development, and you can review some of those theories And when you do that, you will find evidence for why things worked and why they didn't. Moving on now down to the third indicator, alignment among goals, instruction, and assessment. It should be clear. This part of the reflection really should not be news to anyone by this time. Everything that you have done should have been correlated to the learning goals. And in your assessment plan, you did that according to the learning goals. When you talked about the learning outcomes, you did that according to learning goals. And when you talk about your instruction, you're doing that according to the learning goals. So a brief synopsis of what you've done and how everything tied together would be fine. In fact, in this case, if you simply have a table that shows those elements, the learning goals, your instructional strategies, your assessments, and the why what you did was effective, then you have plenty, and you really don't have to go into a great deal of detail. Because, as I've said, by the time you get to this section, the entire thing should be obvious. Implications for future teaching. Good teachers are always looking to the next lesson, and the next unit, and the next year for that matter. The idea here is to provide some ideas for redesigning learning goals or instruction or assessment or all of those, whatever needs it. And again, you're going to base your comments on a lot of what you saw in the first indicator in this section, which was the interpretation of the student learning. There is a phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, that's only partially true, because what may be working now may or may not work well for the next group of students. So, if nothing else, you should provide some ideas for redesigning those things for the kinds of students that you anticipate might be in your class. Not necessarily the students who are in your class. And if everything did not go well and you have to reteach, then you certainly would want to look back at the same students you just worked with and try to more adequately meet their needs. The final section, the final indicator, is implications for professional development. This presents a small number of professional learning goals that come out of this experience for you. And these are goals for your professional development. These are not goals for the students. So this is the one section where you are going to be able to say, I learned these things about myself. I learned these things about my content or my instructional capabilities. And based on those things, I need to pursue professional development in these areas, whatever those areas are, but I need to pursue some professional development to shore up my weaknesses or to really just sharpen and increase areas where I am competent but would like to become more so. That is the entirety of this section. As you can see, this can be a mix. This is really up to you about how you'll present this information. It can be a mix of tabular or text information. It can be strictly text. Just be sure that as you are addressing this, you break your responses down by the pieces that are the indicators. So in this case, you would have 5 sections for your response here. That may be 5 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs and 2 tables, whatever it is. Remember the general rule, though: if you use a table or a chart or a graph, have some words that explain what you're putting in that visual form, so that those who are not visual learners will be able to understand it. And that's it. As is true with all of the other sections of the teacher work sample, if you have questions, please address them to your instructor, to your university supervisor, or to your cooperating teacher.